Hello, you may know me as Bowman. I had made a video where I previously beat Capsule Monster Coliseum, only allowing myself to use each single attribute type and limiting myself to only level 1 units. Today, however, we are playing the Libra mod, which is essentially the hard mode version of the game, using only level 1 units. We also won't level up our effect attribute bonus to make it even harder for us. We started the challenge selecting the pre-made fire package since it was my favorite type from the last video. I'll be showing you guys mainly matches from areas 3 to 5, starting with Odeon first. The reason we are at Odeon first is that he's where the game starts getting difficult. The first two areas aren't much different from the original game, apart from a few unit swaps the creator did. Don't get me wrong, they are major overhauls that actually do make the game harder than it originally was. I even lost a few of them along the way. If you do want to see the full games, I did upload them as enlisted, and we'll leave them linked below in the description as sort of a form of proof, or if you just want to see the full videos. With no audio, of course. Sorry, but I either had music playing in the back most of the time, or people talking in the background, plus the 2x speed emulator audio would have probably driven you crazy. I know it did for me. Let's instead just do a quick recap of the fights. For some of the harder fights anyway. We'll skip Joey, Tristan, and Duke since they're the tutorial levels. Taya and Grandpa had their crystals reassigned to actually benefit their unit types. Here are the teams we used to beat them. They actually did cause us some trouble, mainly because I wasn't used to them having better units. Normally, they're just a steamroll in the base game. As for Area 2, Mako still suffers from terrible map bonus syndrome. Mai is almost identical, with her units getting small attack range buffs. Mokuba does get an auxiliary hero that attacks and moves at 3 diagonally, but he's the same for the most part. Rex proves to be more difficult as Earth does get a substantial health bonus. And his love interest Weevil is pretty easy as diagonal attackers clear his wood units easily. We even used wind units against his woods and did just fine. As a side note, we also skipped Bakura in Area 3. He does have a different focus on units in this game, but he's still as easy as the base game, I don't know why. With that long-winded introduction out of the way, we are now finally at Area 3 Odeon. One thing you will notice is our main team consists of diagonal attackers. One unit you will see in almost every single duel from here on out is the lovely blue dragon, winged dragon, guardian of the fortress. Our winged dragons will essentially form the core of most teams we will use from here on out, as it is one of the few units that can attack 3 tiles away. The only other units that can do this as well are Faithbird that only moves diagonally so it can attack half the map, and Jellyfish that attacks 3 tiles directionally so it isn't as useful as a diagonal attacker. They are also relatively weak units as we get them really early on, but the ability they have to poke units down from a safe position is what makes them really important to this run. After all, why does it matter if I slowly chip away his units only doing 10 damage if they can never touch me? Obviously I'm exaggerating just a little bit, but our units don't scale as well as they do in the base version of Capsule Monster Coliseum. Currently we're facing a bunch of earth units that aren't generally known for their high defense values, that's why they have high HP values to make up for the lack of their defense, but later on it's not uncommon to see a 200 defense value on some units. Even now, Odeon's earth units had way more health points than my Guy the Swift Knight did in that run that I did in another video. And keep in mind, that's a late game unit that had around 500 some, closer to 600 HP. And we're facing that level of values early on in only just a third stage of opponents. Just to show you what the Libra mod does in terms of balancing, you could even see just how long it takes for us to destroy one singular unit. On the base game, it takes us around 2, maybe 3 hits of a neutral unit to take over his, but here we're taking around 5-6 hits. You could even see our Summon Skull, which is a big beefy unit that in fact should be doing major damage to his Celtic Guardian as it's stronger than it on the type chart. But one thing that the mod did that I absolutely love is change these values to make it so that you just don't bring in the opposing type and win and stomp the opponent. You still have to think and not just overrun based on numbers. Normally in the base game you bring in a bunch of dark types and thunder types to counter Odeon's combination of light and earth. But as you can see here, Odeon can take our normally slippery thunder type with his buff attack range and deal with our summon skull despite having the type advantage. Luckily for us, we have the aforementioned jellyfish and the winged dragon to help us trade back some kills. We can even skip forward a bit here, as all we're going to do is move our Karibo in to bait his Megazowler into a perfect position for us to retaliate. All that's left to do is to use our diagonal attackers to take down his 700 HP Megazowler. Normally in the base game, he actually wouldn't even be able to attack us in his turn right here, as it would only have a 1 attack range. That little extra attack range could give him the edge in some cases. However, in this case we have our jellyfish and our crocodilus to close out this duel so we can move on to our next opponent, Pegasus. And we'll start this duel off hot by getting the first attack with our winged dragon guarding the fortress. And I try to size up to see what I can get out of this, but I decided to just back up and set up for the next turn, as we do have to watch out for his mystical elf, as it can move 3 spaces away and attack 2 diagonally, which is what most of our units attack ranges are at this point. Mystical elf is also extremely tanky, as you can see there, it would have only taken 26 damage from our Faith Bird, and it only did take 10 damage from our giant jellyfish. So for now, all we can do is try to manage his left side push, as his Magician of Faith and his Mizaki slowly push up. We try to see what we can get out of this, but luckily his Mizaki is super low, so our Mega Thunderball can take it down despite it being a Thunder type. Then we can use our Winged Dragon to clean up the Magician of Faith, and now focus on the Mystical Elf, as we're going to have some trouble with this unit here. Okay, our Winged Dragon did 50 damage, which is actually more noticeable than what we've been doing of 10 damage each single turn. Here you see his Mystical Elf retaliate and almost take our Jellyfish. We have to watch out now and slowly move it out of position. But you can see here his Lucky Trinket and his Rogue Doll, which are actually pretty good units in the base game despite them only being level 1 there. But now imagine those things buffed, so we're going to have a bit of trouble with them as well. For now, we'll focus on our Jellyfish that I decide to move back and act as bait so his Mystical Elf would come in and attack it. It was pretty much useless at this point, as only doing 10 damage, so we might as well bait it in. Next turn we will not put our Jellyfish to sacrifice to Vayne, as we will start taking down his Mystical Elf. As you can see there, man, it's tanking a bunch of hits from our strongest units so far. You can see me there working down his Lucky Trinket and Rogue Doll. I almost forgot to attack the Mystical Elf, but luckily I still had one more unit. It would actually been a huge blunder to not take that Mystical Elf that turn, as we're getting low on units as well. Since we're getting so low on units, we now have to focus down on a singular unit. You can see there, we start working on his Lucky Trinket, and we now have to full commit to his Rogue Doll to minimize the damage he can do next turn. All that's left to deal with now is his Statue of Easter Island that takes out our Faith Bird and his Lucky Trinket. I decide to opt for going after his Lucky Trinket first. You may be wondering why I go after Lucky Trinket first, and it isn't because I've already started working it down, but it's because Statue of Easter Island is a diagonal attacker, and if you've seen my other video, normally the thing about diagonal attackers is that they can't attack half the map tiles. So if you stand in the right tile, these diagonal attackers with diagonal movement can never ever attack you. Obviously here he can attack us because we have to attack back. That's the way our Winged Dragon works. But that's besides the point. We can now move on to Bandit Keith. So funny thing about the ex-US champion Bandit Keith, we're facing a special spawn version of him, I believe. And what I mean by that is, you can see there's a weird unit you may not have seen in the base game before behind his slot machine, and that's the Pendulum Machine. The creator of this mod does have a YouTube channel that showed up in my recommended, and I had clicked through some videos after I'd beat the game. One thing I've seen is that there are special spawns that happen in the game. I think there's a 10 through 18% chance that a certain unit will spawn in the game. One of these being the Pendulum Machine you're seeing now. There are multiple other duelists that had special spawns that I had gotten throughout this challenge, as I did restart a bunch of duels towards the latter end of this challenge. I believe one was Merrick 2 and the other was Bakura 2. When the matches started, I heard like this weird little sparkle sound, and I had to check the patch notes to see if something went wrong or like something was wrong with my computer, because it was just like caught me so off guard. I was surprised, but when I saw the patch notes, it pretty much said, hey, these duels are already hard, let's make them harder somehow by giving him better units. Bandit Keith wasn't necessarily harder. As you can see there, we have his Pendulum Machine locked down on the left side of the map. He doesn't want to move up and try to attack, as he's pretty much cornered and can't do anything to us without losing his Pendulum Machine. As far as those other duels go, let's just say I did not manage to beat them with their rare units spawned in, as it was just too hard. I don't think I could do it. I just gave up. I just did the regular fight. I do appreciate, however, that the dev did add that in, as you have these new units that you can actually take from and add to your pool of collection if you're doing a normal run. But that's enough about that. Let's get in a little bit more into the play-by-play of this duel, as it's almost done. You can see his Feral Imp and his Barrel Dragon are barreling down the middle of the lane. We can take his Feral Imp back with our Winged Dragon. We do have to move our King Piece, as his Barrel Dragon can attack at 3 units away while moving at 2, so it would be in one-shot range. And keep in mind, Barrel Dragon is really strong normally on in the base game, but here the dev just went all out and gave him a 600 attack damage value, which sounds absolutely absurd. It sounds like some kid just went in the playground, made his custom character and said, you know what, let's give him 600 attack power. We were prepared for this, however, as our Winged Dragon can avenge our flame manipulator and take back his barrel dragon. All that's left is to take the pendulum machine, and we're going to kind of loop him down, and it's pretty much a done deal at this point. So we'll skip a bit forward. As you can see, our great white brings him down to 118 HP. He can attack our fiend reflection, and we will set up our winged dragon to take him down next turn. However, we'll let our fiend reflection do it, and we'll move on to the next duel Merrick. As you've deduced by now, you will know that our winged dragon will be the opening attack of this duel. As far as Merrick 1 goes, he isn't too difficult. I recommended this in my last video where I said if you have any diagonal attackers, this is the time to use them. Mainly because they exploit the movement of his units very well in both the base game and this version of the game. There is also a weird glitch that happens if you don't know, where the enemy won't attack over these green tiles or the non-terrain tiles. When you open up the map, you see all the green tiles. They won't attack over those for some reason, so you can exploit that really well with these attackers. Not that I'm saying you'd actually have to exploit this bug or this glitch in the game. As you can see here, 3 of his units are stuck on that singular block and they can't even attack us, but we can attack them back. The more and more I've played on Merrick's map, the more I've realized that it's actually more detrimental to him than it is to us. As you can see here, we're gonna move in and start working down his Gear Golem, the moving fortress. It can never attack our fiend reflection. We take the Ryukushin with our Prisman. The following turn he does retaliate and bring our Prisman super low. Luckily for us, we're not on the opposite side where he has the Thunder Tiles and will have that bonus. We will cheat death just that turn, and the following turn we can take down his 2-mouth Dark Ruler, and we can start working down on that second one to bring our total to 4 mouths. But I realized that we have light units, so they do almost no damage, so we'll focus on getting his Gear Golem moving fortress. We do lose our Skelengul or Skelengul. I still don't know how to pronounce that unit. You guys could just let me know in the comments how it's actually pronounced. Anyway, we will use our winged dragon to bring our total count to 4 mouths, and all that's left to do is skip a little bit forward and we'll take down his Zoa with our fiend reflection number 2. Now we move on to area 4 on Kaiba, and you guessed it, another winged dragon guardian of the fortress starting attack. I could have even been fancy and done 2 attacks on my winged dragon, but his Aki beam was right there set up ready to take the trade back, and I don't want to lose this unit. It's actually really important. Speaking on the importance of units, one thing I would always do, and I'm not kidding, I would always do this against Kaiba in almost every single match. I would browse my entire collection and see which units had both A, a diagonal attack, and B, diagonal movement. Mainly because if you can move in quick enough, you can attack his blue eyes before it's even summoned. You can see here, we'll pause a little bit forward. You can see there our gazelle could attack his blue eyes in his unhatched state. As it's still there, it hasn't been moved from where it was summoned. I would have done it in this duel, but I didn't have another unit that can attack it as well. Normally you'd be able to attack it and take it in one hit with Gazelle, but it survived this time. I believe the dev realized that you could go in and get some cheap wins against Kaiba like this, so he gave more health to some of these unsummoned units. I know it was also possible in the Bandit Keith duel, as you can go in early and get his Barrel Dragon before it even summons. However, I didn't even do it against Bandit Keith. I wanted to do the duel normally. I also kind of forgot to even put a unit that can actually do that in the Bandit Keith duel. But I did try it against Kaiba and it did not work out in my favor. I had to restart it because I did not want to start with one less unit on my team. Speaking of our team, man, what a great transition. We have our Guruzi, as you see there. It's one of the strongest fire units that we will be using throughout this game. Or should I say for the remainder of the game, since we are essentially at area 4. I may have lied there a bit too, as we won't be using it for the rest of the duel, but we will still use it for the rest of the game. He just took it with his blue eyes, which is essentially just the light version of Guruzi, as they both have similar movement and similar attack patterns. Unlike my Guruzi, however, he can actually tank several hits, and by several I mean probably twice as much as my Guruzi did in that fight. I still, however, prefer the big green lizard over the white lizard, mainly because Guruzi just does way more damage. And sure, having the added bulkiness of a blue eyes is nice to have, but for us it won't really matter, as most units from here on out will just have the crazy ridiculous attack ranges, so we're dead in one hit anyway, so we want to do as much damage as possible while we're still alive. You have even seen in the previous duels with Bandit Keith where his monster just had 600 attack, and I don't think there's any one of my units that can actually survive that attack. And even the ones that could actually manage to survive the attack, if I have any, I haven't actually checked, it would have to have the appropriate typing, and sometimes those monsters just don't work on every single map or most maps, if that. I have even stated before that Most of the times, the counter matchups won't even have good beneficial typing on the map, so they won't even do that much damage in return if they even do manage to survive 1 or 2 hits. We've also been doing pretty well ignoring the type chart matchup. Of course, I'll add in 1 or 2 units here or there that might have a beneficial typing to them, but for the most part, our winged dragons have been doing an excellent job at carrying us through this game. Speaking of which, we sped up through the last part of the game, and all that's left to take is his Mystic Horseman. We'll slowly whittle it down. It won't even bother attacking us as it can. It's a terrible earth unit. Poor guy can only attack 1 tile away. So we'll take it with his winged dragon, and we'll start with Merrick. We'll start off strong as well by starting off with the "why are you hitting yourself" approach. Normally in the base game of Capsule Monster Coliseum, you can do a crippling amount of damage from his map tiles, but in this version, he actually gets an insane amount of AP and can move every single unit he has on turn 2. It took me a surprising amount of time to figure out which units he would move first. I figured out that he would move his 2 winged dragons in first. Figuring that out though was not the least of my issues, as I had to figure out 2 units that were perfect enough to move in and keep that lead going on the map Hazard War. I already knew I was bringing in Garuzi, and after some trial and error, I realized that Drollbird was the best choice for me. It may sound weird, but it just worked out well. It moved 4 tiles away and attacked diagonally once. Even though it doesn't have a crazy attack range, that singular attack range tile just melded so well with our team. Although it didn't get to attack, there were some instances where I could have attacked, and sometimes when I did other attempts, he would move in different ways that I had to move my unit to potentially swoop in and get an attack. But you'll see here, we're just focusing mainly with our Faith Bird. That's a really tanky behemoth, by the way. Look at all these attacks it's taking. Almost every single dragon cannot take it down. It's astonishing how little damage I did. We're using Drollbird as a defensive shield. Poor guy was just used and abused for the purpose of controlling the map and taking an attack for the Garuzi. I still can't believe looking at the footage. Just look how tanky this behemoth is. I don't know how many attacks it's taken so far. And you can say, well, why didn't you use a water monster? Just use a water monster. Water counters fire, correct? Well, yes, but actually no. I was surprised just how little damage the water monsters I had did. There was one monster that was called the Mecha Bass, I think it was. Anyway, you'll see it in the upcoming Shoddy duel, but for the purposes of this duel, it was essentially useless, as it was the only one that did damage. Sure, it did damage, right? But the problem was it moves diagonally and attacks straight, so it was a bit awkward to control against his units. Although it may have been awkward to use, it was still usable. Every other single water monster I had was dead on arrival. They did no damage at all, and even if they did deal with the fire monsters, all the other wind monsters would destroy them in one singular hit. Apart from that, they didn't have good movement tiles, so I couldn't control the map hazards as much as I did in this duel. You could even see a bunch of our units, they don't do as much damage as that singular map tile would do to them. You even saw in the duel, one singular tile does 50 damage, while some of my units in some cases did 10 damage. So one singular tile is equivalent to 5 attacks for my weak units. Not to mention, by the way, it was really difficult to move his units and manipulate them in such a way that they would move into these tiles. I believe on the base game I got a high score of around 700 damage that I dealt with his map tiles, and on this version it was near on impossible to even break that or even come close. I'm really glad the map tile damage was there, because this battle would be near on impossible. Don't get me started on the Merrick fight that has the rare spawn of Command Knight, because that thing, I don't know the exact number, but I would not be exaggerating if it had double the health of the Molten Behemoth that was at the start of the match. I did manage to clear every unit except the Command Knight, and once I saw the numerical values on that thing, I said, nope, I'm doing the normal battle only. I talked so much that I did not realize we spilled over into the Ishizu fight. If you've watched my last video, you know my gripes with this map, and I will skip it. You can watch that video, or I'll just give you a little rundown. The map is just awful. There are way too many green tiles. I do appreciate that the mod did add some interesting units into this battle, but for the most part, we're going to skip it. It's not a fun fight. If you want to see it, again, link in the description. Now, would you look at this, my favorite battle of all time, but Kura number 2. We're going to start off strong by attacking with Aki Beam and using the signature Winged Dragon to take his Dark Magician Girl. This match took me multiple, a large handful of, and quite frankly, a lot of attempts to actually get this done. I don't know how many different approaches it took, but the main approach that worked for me was getting that Aki beam in and getting aggressive. I tried being a little bit more defensive, but it didn't work. Bakura 2 has way too many good moving units that my defense would just get overrun, so I tried a little bit more offensive approach. As you can see here, my Aki beam has been pushed up. It's already gotten 2 units with the help of Winged Dragon and Guruzi. Now we move in. It may seem almost like a death sentence. I'm moving it into 3 different units that can attack it, but we do manage to take Curse of Dragon with my Winged Dragon the following turn. He does have 2 Royal Guards that will respond to my Aki Beam the following turn, as they are Thunder units that can easily wipe it out. Aki Beam, however, was a worthy sacrifice, as if you know this map, once he touches the very center of that map, the whole map changes, it gets darker, and every single one of his units are buffed. Every and any single unit that can move and touch that skull in the center can activate this effect. You see there, we stopped his Trihorn Dragon from actually touching it. It was only 1 tile off. Talk about close calls, right? And you see there, the Aki Beam was placed strategically to force the Trihorn Dragon into attacking it and not activating the buff. On the attempts, he did manage to force his way onto the center of the map and activate the buff. I immediately gave up. The first attempt, I was like, maybe I could work around this. And once I saw every single one of my units died in 1 singular hit, it was just, I mean, what can I do at that point? I just have to give up and retry again. Thankfully, we did restart, and now we're at this position where we have only a Royal Guard and his Pumpkin, the King of Ghosts, to deal with. Thankfully, we have our 2 trusty Winged Dragons that we've been glazing all video long to help deal with this. Royal Guard only has an attack range of 2, and our Winged Dragon has an attack range of 3. However, it does move 3 tiles, so it will eventually catch up to 1 Winged Dragon. So we have to sacrifice it. I'm thinking, where am I going to move it? And I have to move it to the left so the Pumpkin can attack and take it. We will lose it the following turn. Winged Dragon can trade the following turn after. Now it is a 1v1 Pumpkin versus my Winged Dragon. We will use the magic of editing and skip a little bit ahead here. You can see the full video, how long it takes him to loop him and get him into this favorable position. Keep in mind, if we move correctly, it can never attack us. You see there, if I move next to it, it can move diagonally 1 down and attack us up. So we will move a little bit up ahead, attack it once, and it has nothing left to do, so it just hands us the wind right next to us. With that, we beat Bakura 2 after multiple attempts and several hours. Speaking of multiple attempts and several hours, we are now at Shoddy 2. I wanted to do him first. I always thought he was an easy duelist in the base game. I just thought, man, we're gonna get the free win, let's just get him out of the way, and nope. I was completely wrong, entirely wrong. I could not be more wrong in my life. I had to do every other duelist first to get out of the way. I was just so frustrated with this duel. Normally in the base game, you can just rush him down. His crystal is just there waiting to hand you the free victory. But nope, you have to do the exact opposite of Bakura. And instead of hyper offense, you go more on the defensive. You can see here almost every single one of our units are in the starting zone. The only aggressive move we made is moving our Mecha Bass. Hey look, that's the one I mentioned in the Merrick. That's that guy right there, little fish next to the bird. We moved them in and got in the free kill on the Launcher Spider. But the rest of them, we have to set up and decide, do we want to attack? Do we want to trade in? What's the best plan we can do here? This is where we get offensive, by the way. We've been playing so slow up until this point. I've skipped half the duel. You can see in the full duel in the description. I think around half of it is just me waiting for her to push up entirely. Now that Shoddy has pushed up, we can go bird for bird. And the following attack will be with Skull Guardian into the Harpy Lady. I was waiting for her to push up specifically because she can cause us so many issues. She's really tanky and truly troublesome despite having a singular attack range. Normally, units like this don't cause as many issues. You can just kite them around. But with Faith Bird and Launcher Spiders and a Winged Dragon at her disposal, it isn't difficult for a Harpy Lady to corner us and take us down. But now that she is out of the picture, all I see for our future is a win, as all we have to deal with is a Launcher Spider and a Cherubin, I don't know how to pronounce the name. He's a Fire Knight, okay? It's the little guy right there with the spike ball in his hand. We're just going to slowly move up and creep on up. We're still taking it slow, as I've never dealt with them so far, so I don't know how much damage they can actually do. But you can see here, we still have our Winged Dragon to slowly whittle down the Launcher Spider, and the Mecha Bass will attack and take the Launcher Spider. And I was surprised when Guruzi actually one-shot that unit. That was actually pretty good. Alright, Area 5, the Pegasus rematch. This one is going to be a fairly long one. I thought this was actually impossible for a second, and by a second I mean several hours. I tried I don't know how many different combinations of units for several hours until I realized the units weren't the issue. Well, they were, but more important, the strategy was starting second. Normally you want to start first in almost every turn-based game except Pokemon Pocket TCG. I realized after multiple attempts that going second was the only viable strategy for us. This was mainly due to the stat bonuses the map gave if I went second. Ideally, you don't want to get Pegasus to get the bonuses on the what we'll call the going first side, but what's more important is giving your units the plus 100 boost going on the second side. Without this very generous and hefty boost, we would get the default 10 damage minimum or around that much. We'd be lucky to even break 100 damage a hit in some cases. I alluded to this before, but this is the match where his water units have 200 or more defense. So not having this attack boost is almost asking to lose. This side also does boost our reliable heavy hitter that deals with his wood types, Mr. Guruzi. We also have an earth boost for our very mobile Gaia and performance of the sword that has a 3 attack range, so it's essentially just an earth version of our winged dragon. We also do have a Sengenjin that just recently got a retrain in the TCG, but it was just there to soak attacks. It didn't really do much in this duel. As for the light boost, we use it for our Skull Guardian and our Sairyu. I don't know how to pronounce that dragon's name. It's the pink dragon, okay? Don't go after me, bro. It's just the pink dragon. They're both fairly tanky and take little to no damage when under the light tiles. As for the wind boost, it goes to our lovely blue lizards, our winged dragons, Guardian of the Fortress, as well as our lesser dragon. Our lesser dragon has 1 less attack range than our Faith Bird, but one advantage it does have over the Faith Bird is that it moves forward directionally. Having a diagonal mover in this map would be a little bit more awkward. As you can see, all our units are trapped in that corner. The lack of viable tiles we were able to move to caused us to lose several duels, but once I figured out the right comp, I wouldn't say it was necessarily easy, but it was actually doable. As you can see there, it still isn't as simple as just move your unit in and attack, as it takes forever to take out this treant. It may not have an insane amount of health, but it does have a high defense, so we're doing nothing to it. Pegasus, on the other hand, will take one of our units and leave our winged dragon on the verge of being captured, and he's slowly creeping up, but this is where the tide turns for us. We can move our Skull Guardian up. We can maybe get his Kairyu, but he will be in danger of his water unit next to it, so we'll go with Lesser Dragon and take it out. For the first time, you can see here Guruzi does step on a fire tile and it actually takes out his treant. Normally, I think it did like 70 damage, but here it finally gets rid of this problem monster. His only remaining threats are his water units, as they're extremely tanky, but you can see here we finally do 100 damage to Suijin as we abuse these tiles, and that's what I've been talking about. Without these tiles, this would not have been possible. We now have the 7 to his 5 unit advantage. We're going to keep increasing that advantage for us, as well as we're going to whittle down his Javelin Beetle. We could have moved Guruzi up and given it a fire tile, but then it would have been in range of his water tile, and it only has so little health left over. Plus, with our winged dragon there to take that extra 3 damage, we don't need to put our Guruzis in danger, as he does have 2 remaining wood units. Those 2 are the perfectly ultimate great moss, which you can guess by now we will have difficulty dealing with if our Guruzi is done for, as our team consists mainly of wind attackers. The only 2 other options we have are Gaia the Fierce Knight and our Skull Guardian. Our Sengenjin still is there, but as you can see, it's on the left side of the map. It hasn't done anything, and it will get taken out by the perfectly ultimate great moth. That, by the way, can move 3 tiles away and attack 2 diagonally. The moths are fairly bulky, not nowhere near the water monsters, but they still can take a decent amount of hits. We're essentially forced to play around Guruzi at this point, so we're gonna wall off every single attack possible from his units and keep Guruzi in the back safe as possible. The rest of the sequence will be somewhat slow, as our winged dragons barely manage to break the 100 damage mark. The rest of our units only do 20 damage, and he will move out of the way the following turn, which makes it a bit annoying, so we'll set up. Then his perfectly ultimate great moth will come in next turn to attack our Gaia. Luckily, he didn't finish off our Gaia for some reason, so we still have 2 units to attack with. We'll move up and we go after his perfectly ultimate great moth. The rest of our units deal no damage, but we're still going to keep them in line to absorb attacks for Guruzi. Like I said, this section will be extremely slow. You could even see our Gaia has a boosted tile. It only does 14 damage. The rest of our units still manage to do only 10 damage, moving our lesser dragon up ahead to absorb any possible attack, and it does. It survives. The following turn, our Guruzi can take 1 of 2 perfectly ultimate great moths. We do no damage, as you guessed it, to his remaining water unit. We're going to slowly whittle it down. We're going to even switch up and get the light tile to get more damage on her Skull Guardian, but it doesn't matter, his unit still survives. The following turn, he will attack with his perfectly ultimate Great Moth, and I'm confused as to why he doesn't double down on a singular unit. He's taking this split damage approach, which never ends up working. I don't think it would have mattered anyway, as we still have Garuzi. We're going to move it up and do an astounding 300 damage. His water monster is left for dead, and all that's left to do the following turn is take his perfectly ultimate Great Moth. He's going to just attack our Skull Guardian for some reason, and we will take out his perfectly ultimate Great Moth with our Garuzi. Okay, next up we have Ishizu number 2. Disclaimer, I wanted to just skip this fight and not show it to you, but it was super short and simple. Well, that's assuming you skip the long section of the match that takes forever for her to push up and start attacking your units. It should be illegal how large this map is. It reminds me a lot of Hyrule Temple from Smash Bros. I'm assuming you've played it because these games are around the same era. Every time I play on this map, I just wonder, why are there 4 unnecessary lanes you can take and a bunch of these tiles in between that just stall the match out for no reason. Around 2/3 of this fight was me just waiting. As you can see, I'm just planted in by the spawn area, waiting for her to walk in and let me take her units. If you watched my previous video, you would know it took me over an hour to beat her alone with dark units, as she was a light user back then. Now she's more focused on fire and wind types. I do like this team way more than I do the original light team, as her units are extremely fragile, apart from the Command Knight, of course, who actually managed to soak up a couple attacks. Every other unit died in almost one hit. I believe the Coliseum was the only one apart from the Command Knight that managed to take more than one hit, and even then it only soaked up 2 attacks. I am extremely thankful that this fight was short and simple. It didn't take me multiple attempts, multiple hours, none of that. I am glad to be out of this fight. I would have gone insane if this was actually a really difficult fight. Luckily, I was able to take in my favorite win units and get the map bonus. Get in, get out, take all of your units, super simple, and move on to the next opponent. The next opponent happens to be her brother, Merrick 2. I thought this fight was going to be somewhat difficult. Then I remembered I didn't have that much issue in the base game. I was curious as to how much more difficult this fight can generally be, because his main monster is the Crimson Sunbird that moves diagonally. Same with a bunch of his units that move diagonally. And guess who we have? The Winged Dragons that can attack diagonally and essentially just counter the units. As I say that, we do lose one dragon to his Sky Dragon. That was inevitable, however, as his Sunbird and his Sky Dragon, that has an increased attack range by the way, are set up to take traits from each other. I wasn't too worried, as we can take the Sky Dragon as well. Let's give the spotlight to some of his other units that we have to look out for. One is his Meteor Bee Dragon that can attack and move directionally 3 spaces, and that's about it. He does have a La Jinn, Parrot Dragon, and even the star of our team, the Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress as well. These units don't matter for the most part, as we can one-shot them like we did in the previous Ishizu fight. I didn't realize they shared some units until after reviewing these fights. Merrick and Ishizu both had similar pacing as well, Merrick being just slightly quicker due to not having the map size of the Hyrule Temple. Matches against other fire and wind users usually did end up being quick, as our strategy focused on the same attributes, so we usually ended up getting a map bonus that helps our wind and fire units as well. The only one that was difficult was the Merrick fight before this. That was mainly due to the limited map size. We only had a 7 tile wide map in that battle. That map size prevented us from really abusing the 3 tile diagonal attackers that we have been using throughout this whole playthrough. As you can see here, we're not having too much difficulty against this Merrick fight. Ideally, it should be harder than the secondary Merrick fight, but given all this free range we have, we can still abuse our Winged Dragons and our performance of the sword to avoid almost taking virtually no damage. The only times we did take damage or lose any units was simply because the trades aren't in our favors, it's not designed that way, or because we use a unit to bait in another and sneak attack it and take it out. Just like we did with his Meteor Bee Dragon there, it was his only remaining troublesome unit. All that's left now is to take his Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress. It still has a measly 165 health, similar to ours despite it being a higher level. I believe it's level 9, the max level it could be, and we'll take it, and that will be Merrick number 3. Funny story about Shoddy 2. I'm going to skip this because I just want to get into the Kaiba fight. Again, if you want to see it, look below for the unlisted video. Nothing interesting happens in this fight. Here's my team we used to defeat Shoddy if you want to try this yourself. So on to that funny story. I leveled up my Gruzi by accident, so I had to redo this whole thing over because I wanted to use it for the Kaiba fight. I also had not been putting any points into my effect strength bonus when I leveled up my symbol up until this point. But after losing to Kaiba multiple times, I realized I had to put points into this since I just couldn't beat him. That's right, I didn't immediately do the Shoddy rematch. I had to admit defeat to Kaiba, then come back and beat Shoddy again. Good thing I had the save ready to reload. So now we're on to the Kaiba battle, and let me explain to you why this was more of a puzzle than it was a fight at all. The main issue I had here was figuring out how to deal with the Super War Lions that have 1200 HP. 1200, yep, you heard that right. They have 1200 HP. After a while, I figured out that we have to start second, similar to Pegasus, which is one of the few times that we've actually wanted to start second. Like I said before, normally you want to start first, you get the extra attack in, you start earlier, you get to set everything up. But here, we have to start on this side because the Super War Lions, simply put, cannot be looped the way we're doing them right now on the going second side. On the going first side, which is on Kaiba's side right now, we don't have that singular extra tile that we have here to put our faith birds in. You can see there, it's supposed to be like the wings of the boat. On the opposite side as well, his units normally overrun us. On this side, if we set up trades to make it unfavorable for Kaiba, he will never push up. As you can see, his Super War Lions have just been whittled down. The remaining sections of his team don't want to push up just yet. Well, that's assuming that we haven't taken the Super War Lions, as eventually, once those two are gone and cleared out the way, the AI thinks, well, we have to move up, we have to win the game somehow, so here is his secondary push. We're put up against a familiar unit you've seen before, his Blue Eyes White Dragon, that can move at 3 tiles and attack only 2 away, and he has a Guilty of the D Knight that actually can attack 3 tiles away, so we can't abuse it like we can his Blue Eyes, so we'll have to stay away from it for now. We'll mainly focus on the Blue Eyes for now, as the Guiltia can destroy every single unit we have, and we don't want to lose any 3-range attackers, as we have to continue abusing the fact that we have these attackers. We'll take the Blue Eyes the following turn. You can see there, I'm deciding what to move, and we'll take it with Garuzi. The rest of the turn here will just be set up to prepare for the next round, as we have to constantly keep moving our units, and we have to prepare because Guiltia is ready to attack. The following turn, you'll see it finally move in and take our Crab Turtle in one singular hit. It may seem bad for us that we just lost the Crab Turtle, but on other attempts where we try to save the Crab Turtle, it did not work out in our favor, as Guilty would just move on and hit something else. So we have to take Crab Turtle as a worthy sacrifice. And I would say it's completely worth losing a Crab Turtle versus a unit that can attack 3 tiles away and move at 3 tiles and one-shot every single one of our pieces for a unit that can maybe do something, but we have other units that are just as good, if not better. You may have seen a small jump cut there, and that's because there was a lot of thinking going on into every single move that I did. I have to take account for all these units that can move 3 tiles away. We have his Panther Warrior that can move at 3 tiles. Luckily for us, that 3 tiles is diagonal, so we can keep exploiting it like we have been doing this whole duel. I believe we haven't even gotten hit once apart from the Crab Turtle. It's almost a near perfectly flawless run, which goes to show just how good I am at this game. I'm just kidding. It's mainly memorization. I lost this fight multiple times. I don't know how many hours it took. I had said it in the Shoddy segment before, but I had attempted Kaiba multiple times and I just gave up because I thought it was near on impossible without having the attribute bonus. As you can see, just shortly coming up, we're getting onto the final trades of the duel, and you'll see just how close we were with some of these damage ranges. We needed all the damage we can get, as at this point we cannot exploit any of the attack ranges as we've been doing so far. He has 2 carrot idols that stick by his 2 performance of the swords, which, as you know, have 3 range diagonal attacks, but unlike ours, they can tank multiple hits. As you saw there, his have 950 HP, while ours has a measly 230 HP. They are also destroying our units. The only one that lives in attack is our lovely pink dragon, because it's by that crystal that has an insane power bonus for light monsters. We will return the favor, however, the following turn, as our Sairyu does sizable amounts of damage on his performance of the sword. It manages to survive, however, as it takes around 4 hits for us to take his singular performance of the sword. Him, on the other hand, he can take our unit in 1 hit. Our Garuzi will survive as it's fairly tanky Our pink dragon is no more, however, and we're cutting it really close. It's 3 units to 3. We'll continue pressuring this performance of the sword, as once it's gone, all that's left is the other performance of the sword that is on 1 hit, and his carrot idol can be abused by itself. I know I said these units can't be abused on their movement and attack tiles, but once that performance of the sword is gone, we can abuse that carrot idol, as those 2 performance of the swords were covering the carrot idol's blind spots. We will, however, still take it relatively slow, as it's not a guaranteed win yet. We can still throw if we move in correctly and move in the spots where he can still attack us. You can see here, I move my Guruzi diagonally 1 tile away from his carrot idol, as that's a safe spot. He can still attack us, but the caveat is he has to wait 2 turns to even attack us if we stand still in the same position. So basically, if you're not playing the game and you're just AFK, you can see our winged dragon is set up in that same safe spot as well. His carrot idol will move the next turn, but like I said, it can't do anything, and we will take the final victory with our winged dragon. We'll let the animation play in honor and celebration of it carrying us, and that is the Libra mod using only level 1 units. Thank you for watching, and subscribe. That's it. Just hit the button, subscribe.